Shalom, I'm Alan Weisbart of the Zedek Council, member. Kol Ami and the Zedek Council join with congregations across the nation for this gun prevention Shabbat, gun violence prevention Shabbat. Our guest speaker will be Margot Bennett, Executive Director of Women Against Gun Violence, and Josh Stepakoff, a victim of gun violence and a board member of Women Against Gun Violence. Josh?
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you all for having me, and I'm going to trust that on Zoom they haven't put some fun filters on my face, but it's quite the setup. I love it. I have to lean on humor a little bit. Some of you may have already recognized my name and remember my story, but for those of you who have not, you'll probably be, it'll come to you pretty quickly. My name is Josh. I was born and raised in the San Fernando Valley, and I attended day camp at the North Valley Jewish Community Center back in August of 1999 when a man who will not be named went in with an Uzi knockoff, fired 70 rounds in less than a minute. He shot myself 2 times, 2 other kids under the age of 6, as well as a receptionist in her 60s. And he later went on to Chatsworth, California, not far from here, where he shot a mailman 9 times in the back. Never saw his face, but just saw that he wasn't white and he worked for the government. So here we find ourselves 23 years later, and we just passed the 23-year anniversary in August. And while so many things have progressed and so many things have improved, there are so many things which were on perfect display in the last couple of weeks that we have left to fix. And for me, and for many of you, you'll remember a time when you used to come to temple, you used to come to all Jewish events. There was not a security guard up front. There was not closed gates. It was an open thing. And I think for all of us, and I speak for all of us when I say that that's the goal, that's what we want to get back to. And unfortunately, white supremacy is so prevalent still, and it's something that we continue to work on and to fight. And the only way we can do that is in part by the 2 words that you have up here, which I was very impressed to see, but justice and compassion. And it takes people to continue to talk about all of these things, not only white supremacy, but also gun violence. So like I said, it's been 23 years for me, right? It's something that I have lived with every single day for the past 23 years. And as I said, the North Valley Jewish Community Center, I saw a lot of you go, oh, yeah. And you remembered it, and it came back for a second. And I don't say this as in a bad way, but more so to impress the fact that for many of you, it goes away after time, right? It might come back here and there, but for most of you, it's not something you live with on a day-to-day basis. But for so many survivors, and Margot will share a little bit more about how many people it affects on a daily basis, on an annual basis, that's not something that we get to walk away from. And it's not something that we get to forget about. So for me, for the last 15 years, I'd say, I've been sharing my story to anyone who will listen, to shed some light on post-traumatic stress disorder, to shed some light on what continues to happen for those people who have survived gun violence, whether it be at home, whether it be overseas, whether it be in law enforcement or in the general community. It doesn't matter who it is. When you're faced with gun violence, it's traumatic no matter what. And so I try to share my story. I try to share what that looks like 2 years later, 3 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, because it changes as your life changes, and it's something that you unfortunately cannot escape. So I think a lot of people forget about that, and I think a lot of people lose sight of what's important after mass shootings in terms of support for survivors, their families, all the people around them, but also as a community as a whole, right? I had so many people growing up ask me why I continued to identify as a Jew when I was targeted at such a young age. And for me, I was 6 years old at the time, so it was hard for me to put really great answer together. But at the end of the day, what it came back to was the community that supported me, the community that supported my family. I look around and see who that was, and that was my Jewish community. That was all of the people at my temple, all the people in my community who brought food, who checked in on us for months and years, who offered resources, who did everything possible for my family so that we could take the time to heal that we needed, right? And I looked at all of the values and traditions and things that I've been taught growing up as a Jewish individual, and it always, to me, came back to just being a good person and trying to better those around you. And that is what I keep in the back of my mind. That's why I remind myself when things are scary or when things are tough that, you know, you have to surround yourself with those kind of people. And that's what I do. That's what I choose to do. And all I can hope for is for myself, for all of us, is that we can continue to work hard and see a future where we don't have to have guards at temples, where we don't have to have closed gates, where we can go back to that open feeling that we once had. And, you know, for all of us as a Jewish people, but also just all of us as a country, you know, we're begging for that togetherness that we once had and that openness that we once had. So that's really why I continue to do what I do. And I hope that by sharing my story, I inspire one person to just have the conversation about gun violence, whether it's after a shooting, somebody they know, to reach out to them. Doesn't matter what it is, but just one person, if it's something they think about, whether it's when they go to vote or when they're interacting with people, doesn't matter. As long as it's a gun violence and the effects of it are something that cross your mind in your day-to-day life, I've done my job, right? My suffering, my pain, my trauma was not for nothing. It made an impact. It helped move our society forward in some way, shape, or form. So that's why I continue to tell my story. It's not an easy thing for me to do, but it's something that I feel has to be done, right? So that the suffering wasn't for nothing. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Margot.
Shabbat Shalom. And thank you so much for giving me and Women Against Gun Violence the opportunity to speak with you this Shabbat about white supremacy, gun violence, and gun violence prevention. Many of you know Women Against Gun Violence already. We were founded over 30 years ago, and since that time, the men and women of Women Against Gun Violence have worked tirelessly and fearlessly to prevent gun violence in our communities, our state, and across the nation through impactful legislation and through cutting-edge programs on safe gun storage, on voting, and on divestment. Our work has been and continues to be a model for communities across the nation. In the United States, over 38,000 people have died so far this year by gun violence. Over 20,000 of those deaths have been suicide by gun. Over 1,100 of those deaths have been teenagers. 280 of those deaths have been young children. There have been 580 murder-suicides and 589 mass shootings so far this year. So let's address mass shootings. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. We all know that. Anti-LGBTQ attacks are on the rise. Racism is on the rise. Mass shootings are on the rise, and there is often a connecting link: white supremacy. In 2021, Attorney General Merrick Garland and members of the Department of Homeland Security testified to the Senate that the greatest risk to our national security was domestic terrorism, specifically those who advocate for the superiority of the white race. White supremacy groups see LGBTQ rights, immigration, interracial contact, feminism, and especially the birth of interracial children as being an existential threat because they believe that those factors will undermine the white birth rate and the power gained just by being white. White Americans are predicted to become a numeric minority within 25 years. And as pundits sow fear of whites losing political and social power in the United States, more whites are experiencing a heightened sense of racial resentment toward non-whites and other minority groups. Politicians such as Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, and conservative media like popular Fox News host Tucker Carlson, add fuel to the fire by claiming that racial, ethnic, and other minorities are a threat to the security and safety of white Americans and to traditional American values. The National Rifle Association actually fosters and uses the fear of the other and the fear of loss of rights as primary marketing efforts to sell more firearms. Specifically, the National Rifle Association has been intertwined with white supremacists, amplifying their paranoia about having their rights infringed upon and their guns taken from them. This empowerment of white supremacists and their ideologies has led to upticks in gun-related violence, the causes of which frequently lead back to gun lobbies, such as the NRA. Two recent studies have found more evidence that for many white Americans who advocate for gun rights, it isn't simply about owning and using a tool, but even more about identity and power. One of the research papers published by PNAS Nexus, an open scientific journal, found that the larger the percentage of enslaved people a U.S. county had in 1860, the higher the rate of gun ownership its residents have today. That's not just in the South, that's counties throughout the United States. White supremacy is taught generation to generation. The second research paper published in the American Psychological Association found that white Americans who express high levels of anti-Black sentiment associate gun rights with white people and gun control with Black people. And they are less likely to support gun rights if they believe Black people are exercising those rights too. It's telling that white gun owners are willing to sacrifice some of their own rights if they think minorities will or already have the same rights they do. While a majority of Americans support stricter gun control legislation, attacks such as those in El Paso, Brooklyn, the Tree of Life Synagogue, among others, demonstrate the pressing need for discussion by our country's leadership of the increased frequency of racially motivated mass shootings in the United States and its direct link to white supremacy. It turns out it's not only about easy accessibility to weapons of violence, it's about accessibility and the rise of white supremacy. It's both together. White supremacy plus accessibility leads to more mass shootings. Faith communities represent an enormous untapped resource in the work of preventing gun violence. Millions of people in this country gather each week in synagogues, churches, mosques, and other places of worship. Just imagine if all of these millions of people across our nation could be engaged in preventing the epidemic of gun violence in our country and were willing to confront the threat of white supremacy. Let us consider our foundational core Jewish value, tikkun olam. The most modern and broadly understood notion of tikkun olam is that of repairing the world through human action. Our shared responsibility to change and fix and improve our earthly surroundings is powerful. The sacred in human life, our enjoyment and celebration of our lives and who we are, is destroyed every day by gun violence, with families, loved ones, and communities devastated as a result. I would like to share a few thoughts with you about how you as individuals can approach this life-saving work to prevent gun violence. 1, make sure firearms are stored safely and securely in a locked safe and unloaded with ammunition stored separately. This brochure about Women Against Gun Violence, the Talk Project, is on the information desk outside the room, and I encourage you to take one. Because caring for our children and teens includes making sure that our children visit and live in homes where, if there is a gun, it's secured safely and securely. There have been over 35 school shootings so far this year, and around 74% of the firearms used in school shootings were obtained from the student's home or from that of a friend or relative, and where the knowledge of how the gun was accessed, it turns out that the firearm belonging to a family member, usually a parent, was unlocked and accessible. 2, we can defund the gun industry. And you'll also see on the information table this postcard about our website, divestforourlives.org. We can defund the gun industry, and we can do it right now as individuals. We can take a look at where we bank, where we invest, and where we shop. We must align our banking, investing, and spending with our values. Tikkun olam. The website provides concise information on divesting, as well as links to sites with more detailed and specific information. Historically, we know divestment can work. We saw it in South Africa, where it helped end apartheid, and in the United States, where fossil fuel divestment campaigns have resulted in almost 1,500 institutions committed to divesting their funds from fossil fuels. And critically, 3, be fearless in the face of casual racism, because it can hide something larger. It is a privilege to not say something or engage when a friend, an acquaintance, a family member, or a politician says something racist, anti-Semitic, or relies on a stereotype to describe a person or a situation. We must speak up each and every time. Do not be shy or fearful at the dinner table. Because we recently celebrated Simchat Torah, I wanted to conclude by talking just a little bit about a story in Genesis. So in Genesis, God walks into the Garden of Eden where Adam is hiding because he has sinned. And God calls out to Adam, "Adam, where are you?" Now, of course, we know that God knows where the physical location of Adam is. Rabbis say that what God is really asking is, Adam, where is the authentic you? Where are you as a being, a person, a reflection of the divine? Later, God asks Abraham the same question. Abraham, where are you? And Abraham does not hide. Instead, he steps forward and responds, Hineni, behold, here I am. For me, where are you is really two questions with two answers. Who you are and who you are being. When God asks, where are you? God is also asking, who are you being? With whom do you stand? Are you standing with those who defend and fight for equality, for our democracy, with those who fight for social justice, for our environment, for our communities to be safe from gun violence? Where are you? If I look to my side, will I see you? Will you be there standing with me? We hope you will be inspired tonight to stand with us, by our side, to make the change necessary to keep our children, grandchildren, and all of us safe from the epidemic of gun violence that is sweeping our country. Shabbat Shalom.